The 2018 Winter Olympics in South Korea are just about a month away, and if any transgender athletes seek to compete, they'll be welcomed with open arms. IOC rules allow for transgender athletes to compete as their preferred gender. A biological male winning a gold medal in a women's event now seems a matter of when, not if. Joanna Harper is transgendered and an athlete, and argues that transgender competitors don't enjoy any advantage. Joanna, there are a lot of people who, in this age of gender fluidity, take a relaxed view of it and accept that you can choose which bathroom to use and all that. But that when it comes to sport, when it comes to who's the fastest, who's the strongest, when you're running around a 400-meter track, that basically, from gender fluidity, we're back to two biological sexes in which those who are born male have a distinct advantage. Where are they going wrong on that?
Well, first of all, biology is actually quite complex. And so to suggest that that biology is dimorphic is incorrect. But it is certainly true that people who have gone through male puberty especially do have substantial advantages. And to be clear, the IOC rules say that transgender women can only compete in women's sports after they have gone through a year of low testosterone due to hormone therapy. And that actually changes many biological characteristics, and especially those characteristics that are important for sport.
But
and the second thing I'd like to say is that I've always admitted that transgender women have advantages over cisgender or typical women, but also disadvantages too. And the important question is, can the two groups compete against one another equitably and meaningfully?
Well, let's look at the tests and the testing that you mentioned, where they say you have to, and maybe you can actually explain this in layman's terms. You're a scientist, you understand a lot of this, but lowering testosterone. And I think the thing is you have to have your testosterone levels below 10 nanomoles per litre. And if I think about it carefully enough, I can remember what a nanomole was from my school days, if one drops from the ceiling on my head. But 10 nanomoles per litre, as I understand it, something like 90% of female athletes, their testosterone levels are around 3 nanomoles per litre. So in other words, this upper limit is 3 times what would be typical in a female athlete. So it seems like a kind of arbitrary setting unrelated to the realities of the situation.
Well, I actually agree with you there. And in fact, I am part of a committee that has recently recommended that we lower that limit from 10 to 5. And it's important to understand that that's a limit. The vast majority of transgender women will keep their testosterone below 3 and in fact below 2 and usually below 1 nanomole.
Right.
So this is an upper limit, but I absolutely agree. 10 is too high, and our committee has recommended bringing it down to 5.
You mentioned that it's not like a binary boy-girl thing. There was I think she was a South African athlete who competed in the Olympics and the Commonwealth Games a couple of years back, and her fellow female competitors were convinced that at a certain level she was transgendered, and in fact I think the authorities ended up actually testing her to find out whether she was transgendered because her levels were believed to be extraordinarily high. I wonder if we're in danger in the end of just killing women's sport by this kind of micro-regulation of essentially the individual DNA of each participant.
Well, first of all, the athlete in question, Caster Semenya, was almost undoubtedly intersex, which Some people may not be familiar with that term, but hermaphrodite is a term that more people might be familiar with. But intersex people have a mix of male and female characteristics, right. And Semenya is almost undoubtedly intersex. So there are different issues than with transgender athletes, and it's important to separate the two. But again, it is important to have fair play. It is important to that introducing intersex and/or transgender athletes does not overly affect the playing field that exists. And transgender athletes in particular are hugely underrepresented in women's sports.
Well, we'll see.
In other words, if you were to look at the population of transgender athletes, you would expect that there would be a lot more athletes than there actually are.
Well, we'll see where that ends up, Joanna. It may well be that men and women just end up running around the track altogether, and there aren't these separate events anymore.
The age of the transgender athlete has arrived. Jillian Bearden was born Jonathan Bearden, but now, as a transgender woman, is competing in professional women's cycling events. Bearden isn't the only one, though. Across the country and around the world, biological males are entering women's events in track and field, wrestling, and a lot more. And often they're doing very, very well for themselves, which makes sense because, well, biologically they are men. Paul Ruse is an endocrinologist in St. Louis and studies hormones in children who have some type of gender dysphoria or gender identity issue, and he joins us now. Dr. Ruse, good to see you. This is quite a interesting and kind of quick development in our culture and now in sporting events where people who are born biologically as men at some point in time decide they are transgendered persons, they become women in surgery, hormones and so forth, and then they compete. Now, what's wrong with that? If that's how they feel they're fulfilling their destiny, what's the big deal?
Yeah, well, it's really important to know that while hormones play certainly a role in athletic performance, by giving a male estrogen and suppressing their normal testosterone, there are many aspects of fundamental biology that don't change, and that includes the imprinting that occurs at the genetic level in every cell and every tissue in the body. And many of these changes are not accounted for by the hormones alone, and it's really unknown since this is, as you said, has come on so rapidly. The study of individuals that have had artificial manipulation of their hormone levels and how that influences long-term their performance in athletics and other areas really is largely unknown. These
transgendered centers or gender dysphoria treatment centers where this really wasn't something that was devoted so much time and resources to. But I was reading something, and there's one clinic in the UK that had 94 cases where patients came in and said they were gender confused back in 2009. And in 2016, 1,986 people came in. So yes. The cynic says this is big business, and the idealistic or person who's more into this whole thing says, well, this is just people being freer to express themselves. That's a big jump from just 2009, doctor.
It is. The claim that is often made is that many individuals that had not sought treatment are now coming forward for the treatment. There's many aspects of those statistics, though, that have not been studied in a rigorous scientific manner. And there's a lot of concern that many, especially in the area of children, many children that would normally have realigned their identity to in agreement with their biological sex are moving forward now into hormonal treatment. And that
well, so you're saying, doctor, they're being wait, you're saying they're being affirmed in the counseling sessions or in the doctor's office or somewhere. They're being affirmed in their view that they're not really their biological gender, and it can happen as young as I've seen, and I know you've written about ages 4, 5, and 6. These are little kids who you don't let walk across the street without holding their hand, but they're making some pretty big decisions.
That's correct. I think that the social affirmation component of that, and also putting forward the opportunity for this hormonal treatment progressing on often to surgery, is often influencing the trajectory that these children normally would have. At least that's something that needs to be investigated.
Can I just ask you a real quick question? We're almost out of time. But so if people who are born men and then get this treatment to be, to become, in their view, women, and then compete, they measure their estrogen levels. So it's no longer required by the IOC, the Olympic Committee, that you get a sex reassignment surgery. It's just you have to have a certain estrogen level for a year before competition. Does that make sense to you medically?
Well, I believe it's actually the testosterone level that they're trying to make sure is in a good range.
Exactly.
But yes, and so what's concerning, or at least of questionable about that whole philosophy, the hormone levels do play an influence, but really there are many other components of being a man or a woman. And so if you take a male and you suppress their testosterone and give them estrogen, they really, from a biological standpoint, are still they're feminized males rather than true females.
And the concern doesn't go the other way of women competing in men's sports. They're not very many rules on